Right then. Bim, guess what? JVT's back. And we like a bit of JVT. I'll be able to see what you're saying, because I don't think my...
We're just waiting for this press conference to get underway. We can see the various figures who we've come to know through this pandemic assembled there. We have Dr. June Rain, Chief Executive of the MHRA, Professor Jonathan Vam-Tam as well, Deputy Chief Medical Officer.
Vam-Tam, Deputy Chief Medical Officer.
God, that's what does me head in. They talk too much.
This is a clinical and scientific briefing. I'm joined today, on my right, by Professor Wei-Shen Lim, Chair of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI. To my immediate left, by Professor Rain, Chief Executive Officer of the MHRA, and to my extreme left, by Professor Munir Pir Mohammed, who is Chair of the Commission on Human Medicines. So today's briefing is about the UK vaccine programme. In particular, it is about the AZ vaccine, and we will explain as we go through about a change of course, a course correction, if you like, to the UK programme.
Oh!
Now, if you could have said to me back in March 2020 and predicted how far we would have come so far with our vaccine programme, then I'm not sure I would have believed that we would have got as far as we have.
I agree.
The UK vaccine programme has been the most enormous success indeed.
Yes.
And if you said to me that by March 2021 we would not have needed a course correction, that also would have amazed me. So we must keep this in context of the enormous success that we've achieved so far. I'm going to stop there for now and allow Professor Rain to open the briefing by explaining her perspective from the MHRA on where we are arriving at today. Professor Rain.
Thank you, Professor Vam-Tam. I will now update on MHRA's rigorous scientific review of safety reports of very rare and specific blood clots with low platelet count, thrombocytopenia, associated with COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca.
Thought of a thrombocytopenia, you just take a little blue pill, sort it out.
And we know that vaccines are the best way to protect people from COVID-19 and have already saved thousands of lives, and in fact around 6,000 modelled in the UK by the end of February. But no effective medicine or vaccine is without risk. And with vaccines more complex than usual because the benefits can be to people other than the individual taking the vaccine. While the clinical trials of vaccines allow us to assess relatively common effects, very rare effects are only detected when a vaccine is used at scale on a large enough number of people, and that is why the UK has careful monitoring systems in place, and these monitoring systems are now detecting a potential side effect of the COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca in an extremely small number of people. The evidence
but a couple of weeks ago they were saying there was nothing to worry about.
While it's a strong possibility, more work is needed to establish
but
beyond
in
doubt that
Europe
the
they were saying there was, and we were all laughing at Europe.
Our role is to continually monitor safety during widespread use, to confirm that the vaccines are performing as expected, to identify any very rare side effects, and to ensure the benefits outweigh the risks. The public's safety is at the forefront of our minds. Our teams of safety experts, scientists, clinicians and epidemiologists have investigated, reviewed and evaluated thoroughly and scientifically all safety reports, and our safety reviews are carried out in tandem with the vaccination programme. We've gathered a large amount of data on the safety profile of the available vaccines, and we've done a rigorous scientific review of all the available data with regards to suspected blood clots with low platelet count.
Right.
The Commission on Human Medicines Expert Working Group has also met frequently and critically assessed all the data alongside our regulatory review, and this has also included lay representatives and advice from leading haematologists. Based on the current evidence, the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca against COVID-19 and its associated risks, hospitalisation and death, continues to outweigh the risks for the vast majority of people.
Vast majority.
Our review has reinforced that the risk of this rare suspected side effect remains extremely small. By the 31st of March, over 20 million doses having been given, we have had 79 case reports up to and including that date, 31st of March. All 79 cases occurred after the first dose. Of these 79 cases, 19 people have sadly died. These cases occurred in 51 women and 28 men, aged from 18 to 79 years. And from these reports, the risk of this type of rare blood clot is about 4 people in a million who receive the vaccine. 3 out of the 19 were under 30 years. 14 of the 19 were of the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis with low platelets, and 5 were other kinds of thrombosis in major veins. The balance of benefits and risks is very favourable for older people, but it is more finely balanced for the younger people. And we at the MHRA are advising that this evolving evidence should be taken into account when considering how the vaccine is used. Today we'll be communicating information and advice.
To be fair, these are not politically led.
How to minimise
these are
risks.
science and medically
a lot of guidance,
led,
including how to report any suspected cases. The information for healthcare professionals will be updated, and there will also be information for the public, things to look out for as we continue to monitor this issue. Anyone who has symptoms 4 days after vaccination or more should seek prompt medical advice. A new onset of a severe or persistent headache or blurred vision, shortness of breath, chest pain, leg swelling, persistent abdominal pain, or indeed unusual skin bruising or pinpoint spots beyond the injection site. So Professor Samanir will outline the Commission on Human Medicine's further advice, but I'd like to reiterate again that this is extremely rare. And with the proven effectiveness against the disease that is still a huge risk to our population, the balance of benefits and known risks of the vaccine is still very favourable for the vast majority of people. So, Professor Samanir, over to you.
Thank you very much, June. So I've worked with the Commission on Human Medicines and the Expert Working Group separately to thoroughly
someone's got bed air at the other end.
all the cases coming in with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in the UK. We've taken into account a wide range of data sources. We've looked at information about usage of the vaccine in various age groups and updated incidence rates and benefit risk comparisons for different populations by age and gender. Over the last couple of weeks, the two committees have spent almost 24 hours in committee reviewing these reports. Each report has been carefully
24 hours
by
in
the
2 weeks
MHRA
is not a
and
long
by the
time.
members of the working group, and further information has been obtained where necessary. We've also had independent adjudication of these cases by an expert haematologist, and we worked with another group of haematologists to develop a case definition of these events to make sure that the cases were identified throughout the UK and reported via the yellow card scheme. Based on the currently available data, the Commission on Human Medicines is advising the following. First, a pregnant woman should continue to discuss with the healthcare professional whether the benefits of having the vaccine outweigh the risks for them. Number 2, people with a
I don't think
history
I'm
of blood
pregnant, so
disorders
we're alright
that
on that one.
increase the risk of clotting should only have the COVID-19 vaccine outweigh any potential risks. Number 3, anyone who experienced cerebral or other major blood clots occurring together with low levels of platelets after the first vaccine of COVID-19 AstraZeneca should not have the second dose. We will be continually monitoring further reports as they come in, continually monitoring other aspects to identify risk factors so that we can refine the advice that we give. At present, the data on people who've had 2 doses of the COVID-19 AstraZeneca vaccine are limited because these events are rare and comparatively small number of second doses have been given. Therefore, it is not possible to draw a conclusion about how frequently blood clots with a low platelet count happen following a second dose of the vaccine. But this will be monitored closely by the MHRA and by the CHM as part of the ongoing review. So, just to put into context, these events are extremely rare.
I'm not an anti-vaxxer or everything.
And I want to put it into context in relation
how do we not know that
itself.
these people who've had the vaccine are going to get long-term effects?
Clotting,
which is why I've not had it.
Lowered platelets. And I've got a few figures from
and 3 people I know were ill when they had it, and my mum was taken to hospital when she had it.
On the lungs occur in 7.8% of people who have COVID-19. DVT, deep venous thrombosis, clots in the legs occur in 11.2% who've had COVID-19. And of those people who've been infected with SARS-CoV-2, getting COVID-19 and ending up in ITU, 23% will have some form of clot. COVID-19 also causes strokes in about 1.6%. And up to 30% of people who develop COVID-19 will get thrombocytopenia, which is lowering of the platelet count. And that puts into context that the risk of clots and lowered platelet is much higher with COVID-19 than these extremely rare events which are occurring with the vaccine. So to finish off, the CHM has advised that the link between the vaccine and blood clots in the cerebral and other veins occurring together with lowered platelets is getting firmer, but absolute proof of the link between the vaccine and adverse events will need extensive scientific work. Based on the currently available evidence, and that the benefit risk remains favorable for the vast majority of people, but as June said, is more finely balanced for the younger people. And we are advising that this evolving evidence should be taken into account when considering the use of the vaccine. I'll hand back to Professor Vam-Tam.
What about the poor guy at the other end?
Sir Munir. Thank you, Professor Rain. You've now heard from the regulatory experts, and in a moment I will turn to the new advice from the JCVI with Professor Lim. But before we do that, I'd like to put into context in a visual way what the data are telling us in terms of benefits and risks. So if I could have the first slide, please. So this slide, and I'll go through the first one slowly, shows you in blue type to the left of the slide the potential benefits from COVID-19 vaccination, and on the orange part to the right the potential harms. And you can see that as you go down
we've already seen this
from
one.
top to bottom, those benefits and potential harms are arrayed by age band, starting at 20 to 29, young
the guy at
adults,
this end's
through to 60
squirming
to
his feet a bit,
69,
isn't he?
relatively old adults. And the way these
There we
data
go.
have been arrayed are in terms of intensive care admissions prevented via vaccine on the left, and serious harms potentially due to the vaccine on the right.
Right.
And I thank colleagues at the Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication at Cambridge University for help with getting this slide together. And
I'm not
this
an
first
anti-vaxxer.
slide is
I
set,
was
as
just
you can see
concerned.
from the title, in a scenario of low exposure. And in actual fact, the rates of disease assumed in this scenario are lower than those we currently have in the UK at the moment. And you can see that if you look at the 20 to 29 age band, then the potential benefits amount to 0.8 ICU admissions averted, compared with serious harms of potentially 1.1. But as you go up through the age groups, the amount of serious harm declines, but the amount of benefit in terms of averted ICU admissions becomes much more pronounced.
This doesn't make
And
sense.
these are arrayed over a 16-week period. Now, we don't expect vaccine to last for 16 weeks. We very confidently expect
I get
that
it now.
is going to be many, many months of protection.
So 100,000
from a
people
vaccine. And the
in
reason
those
for
age
using
groups,
16 weeks
if
is
they
because
have
that is a
the
typical,
vaccine,
pandemic
that
wave.
is
That's the
the
duration.
prevented
But you can
admissions
see
to ICU in 100,000.
at a very low exposure
And
risk, lower than we have in the UK at the moment.
If you have the vaccine, the potential harm from the
risk-benefit
vaccine
is relatively finely balanced
goes
in
down
those
to
younger
0.2,
age groups, but it becomes
but
very
goes to
overwhelming,
1.1.
in favour
So
of
it's
vaccine
1
as
in
you go down the
100,000 if you're aged
If we
between
go on to the
20 and
next slide,
29.
please.
I get it now.
This is now a medium risk
Be easier if
scenario,
you'd done a.
and it is
There we go. What?
set at 60 cases per 100,000. That is marginally higher than the UK average at the moment, but it is lower than some of the remaining hotspots in the UK. And you can see that when the disease is around us more,
Yeah, this is the
more
blood clot thing.
exposure, then the benefits, the
See, that makes
potential
sense, that
benefits
blood clot
start
thing.
to stack up, but the potential serious harms remain static, of course. And this is still over a 16-week period, and you can see that the data become more overwhelming in terms of vaccine benefit. Finally, let's move to a high exposure risk, and this one, next slide please, is set typically at where we get to in terms of a pandemic wave. This is set at the height of the second pandemic wave that we went through in the last few months, and I think is reflective of the kind of scenario we want to avoid in the forthcoming autumn and winter if we possibly can. But here, when there's a lot of COVID-19 circulating in the population, you can see that even in the 20 to 29 group, the potential benefits in terms of intensive care, admissions averted, is very much higher than the serious harms due to vaccine. And that's why the regulators have concluded as they have about risk-benefit for the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Right.
So I hope that's placed it all into a bit of context for everybody, so that I recognise it's been a detailed scientific discussion so far, but hopefully those figures bring it to life. And at this point, I'm going to hand over.
Sorry, the next
to
guy's got
Professor Lim
having a
to,
bad hair day,
give us
so
the
we'll go with that.
JCVI advice.
There we go.
Thank you, Shen.
Thank you, Jonathan. JCVI has been meeting over the last 2 weeks, and we have carefully and independently reviewed the safety evidence and the benefit evidence given to us from MHRA and
just noticed his
South
hair.
England. And that includes some of the kinds of data that you've seen earlier on the slide. We are well aware
you're getting
of
old,
the
Curly.
high level of protection that COVID-19 vaccines provide, particularly against serious disease, that is hospitalization, ITU admission, and from dying from COVID-19 disease. Against that must be balanced the uncertain occurrence of an extremely rare adverse event that may be associated with vaccination. Acting really in the interest of safety and for public benefit, JCVI feel that there are 3 points of advice that we would like to put across. The first is that information given to individuals who are being offered vaccination and information given to health professionals should be appropriately updated to reflect the latest considerations and deliberations by JCVI and by MHRA. The second point is that those who have received their first dose of AstraZeneca vaccine should continue to be offered the second dose of AstraZeneca vaccine.
So we've got
according
Moderna
to
coming
set
now as
schedule.
well, haven't we?
And the final bit of advice is that adults who are aged 18 to 29 years old who do not have an underlying health condition that puts them at higher risk from serious COVID-19 disease should be offered an alternative COVID-19 vaccine in preference to the AstraZeneca vaccine where such an alternative vaccine is available. And perhaps it's useful to
See, you can now have the
what is not
AstraZeneca,
advised
Carly, whereas
as well.
previously
We are
you
not
couldn't.
advising a stop to any
Because your body's
vaccination
completely changed in
for
that
any
period of
individual
time,
in
obviously.
any age group. We are advising a preference for one vaccine over another vaccine for a particular age group, really out of the utmost caution rather than because we have any serious safety concerns. This will obviously have some implications in terms of operation and deployment of vaccines, and I'm just going to hand back, therefore, to Jonathan to set those out for us.
Thank you, Wei Shen. So I'm going to round off the last part of this briefing now, and people out there listening to this will say, well, what does this mean for me, and what should I now do?
Exactly. That's
So,
exactly what I'm asking.
Let me begin with the deployment piece. This is a change in clinical advice for the under 30s. It will require some changes in the way that the National Health Service operationalises the vaccine rollout programme. But I've spoken to my colleagues in the NHS in some detail this morning, and I'm assured that actually, because of our supply situation in relation to alternative vaccines, the effect on the timing of our overall programme should be zero. That, of course, is contingent upon getting the supplies that we expect to get of the alternative vaccines, which are the Pfizer vaccine currently in use and the Moderna vaccine that we hope to bring into deployment from mid-April in England. So that's the kind of what does it mean for me. On the what should I do, then please be reassured that two sets of independent experts on the regulatory side, the MHRA and the CHM, and on the clinical advice side, the JCVI, are all over this, and I can testify to the many, many hours of work they have been putting into getting this advice to you in the last week or so, really almost working without a break. And my thanks to the members of those various committees and organisations who've worked honestly night and day behind the scenes to get to this point. This is a course
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you say.
There's no
They've
question
done a good
about
job
that,
getting the vaccines
but it
out.
is,
But
in a sense, in medicine, quite normal for physicians to alter their preferences for how patients are treated over time. It's happened with vaccines only a few years ago. Up until a few years ago, the advice to the elderly and flu vaccines was get your vaccine. And then the JCVI then changed its advice and said our preference is now for the adjuvanted vaccine for the elderly. So changes in preference for vaccines
I don't know what
are
that meant.
business as usual, and this is a course correction. But this is a kind of massive beast that we are driving along at enormous pace with enormous success, this vaccine programme.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you sail a massive line
there we go, analogy.
across the Atlantic, then it's not really reasonable that you aren't going to have to make at least one course correction during that voyage. And I frame this very much in those terms. The NHS has a message that we will get the right vaccine.
I thought I was
to
going to
you
say it's
in
chuck
the
bodies
right
overboard.
time, according to the new JCVI advice. There might be a small delay sometimes. There might be a slightly greater distance that some people are asked to travel. But the NHS is all over this and understands the challenge of making the advice from JCVI truly operate way. I'm going to sum up there by saying this is a course change. It is based on a clinical preference, based on newly emerging data. It will be kept under very careful review. Please remember that the benefits of vaccine accrue over a very long period of time. We are fairly confident that it's months and months, whereas the the event of vaccination is a brief moment. Vaccines continue to be the way out for the UK. They continue to be
And the world.
way in which we can get our lives back to normal and our economy opened up again in the shortest time possible. Thank you very much for listening, and we will now take some questions.
All right, okay.
I think the first question is from Fergus Walsh at the BBC. Hello, Fergus.
Hi, Fergus.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask two questions? Are you worried that this change of course might damage vaccine confidence, especially in the young? Be specific on the risks. Are the risks to those from the vaccine in the under 30s significantly higher than among older age groups?
Thank you. So on the first point, I will answer that question and say that clearly this is a course change. We don't want it to result in a loss of vaccine confidence. I hope I've reassured you that these are really carefully considered decisions, and it remains
He took his
vitally
glasses off.
important
Serious.
that people who are called back for their second dose come for it, and it remains vitally important that all adults in the UK come forward for vaccination when they are offered it. On the point about risk, I think I will defer to Professor Lim.
Thank you. The importance really is not simply the risk to
He's
an
going with his hair,
individual.
isn't he?
There is a slight gradation in the risk of this serious adverse event occurring to older people, but it's really the benefit-risk balance which is most important here. And the benefit from vaccination is, as we know, very, very high in older people and decreases as age goes down because the risk from COVID-19 goes down with age. But there is still a benefit to younger people from being vaccinated. And overall, that benefit is still in favor of being vaccinated. It happens that where we have an alternative vaccine, we feel on balance it would be preferable to offer the very youngest people who have no other health conditions the alternative vaccine instead of the AstraZeneca vaccine, really just on the side of safety rather than because of any particular significant concern about the risk from the vaccine itself.
Yeah, thank you. Fergus, I think I'd just add that the slides that I showed to you were based on ICU admissions and didn't take into account the additional benefits of vaccine in terms of preventing long COVID, which we know is quite a significant problem after this illness, the costs of the illness itself, and the costs of potentially passing on the infection to family and friends. Thank you. Tom Clark, ITV.
Hello, thank you. Can I come back to the vaccine confidence question? You've obviously laid out very clearly what the risk-benefit profile are to reassure people what the risks they're facing are. However,
He's a bit nearer the camera.
would you advise somebody who is, say, 31 years of age, a family member, being encouraged to take the AstraZeneca vaccine? What would you tell them in terms of the risks that they might be taking on and the benefits the vaccine might bring?
That's a very good question, and in fact we were just discussing that earlier because we know somebody whose daughter is around 30, 31, and it's a very relevant and important question. One of the really fundamental things about the vaccine program is that it's shown to be fair and it's transparent, and that's precisely why we want to have this briefing now to demonstrate what the risks and the benefits are so that everybody is informed before they come for their vaccination.
Well, not
We
the
set out quite
millions of
clearly
people who've already had
what
it.
the benefits are against the risk and why we've made a decision about the 30-year-old and who is healthy and otherwise well. For somebody who's 31 and 32, I think they have to make their own decision as to what they want to do about vaccination. we would still say that the balance is in favor of being vaccinated because of the risk from COVID-19 and the protection that the vaccine offers.
Can I just have one follow-up question? Looking at your table there to explain the risks, it appeared to me that the risk of someone below 29 was 5.5 times higher of this very rare blood clotting event than someone 60 to 69. Is that what you've seen in the data? There is a definite trend towards a higher risk of blood clots in younger age groups. And what questions does that raise for, I don't know, pediatric vaccination campaigns?
Indeed, I wonder whether in a moment Sir Munir will want to come back and just discuss the risk signal from the ages in terms of thrombocytopenia and blood clots. But in terms of moving into pediatric vaccination, JCVI has not made any firm decision yet on when to move into vaccination for children. The clinical trials are still ongoing regarding the safety of vaccines in children. So no decision made on that point yet.
Thank you, Wei-Shen. So, Tom, in passing the baton back to Professor Sir Munir on the numbers, I will, in this passing through me, as it were, say that the JCVI's decision to give advice for the under 30s was taken, fully cognizant of the fact that their advice would therefore apply above the age of 30 to 31-year-olds, and that was part of the consideration. And we are talking here in the context of extremely small numbers by age, and that makes the data very difficult to interpret. But I'm sure Sir Munir will elaborate much better on this.
Thank you. So there is a slightly higher risk in the younger age group compared to the old age group, and obviously, as has been already said, that we do need to look at the relative benefits versus the risks in different age groups. The reason why it's a higher risk in the younger age group is not clear. As I said earlier, we need to undertake much more scientific work to understand why the sort of link between the vaccine and particularly the younger age group is occurring. And that will help us in the future to be able to then refine the advice that we give in terms of product information. Further work needs to be done on all of that. With regard to the children, the trial has been paused by the Data Safety Monitoring Board for an abundance of caution, really. We know that children are at much lower risk of these clots and so on, and as we are able to accumulate more data over the next few weeks, the MHRA and the expert working groups will be liaising with the trialists at Oxford and then to be able to determine whether the trial can start again based on the data that's available.
Thank you, Tom. On children, I will just add that there are multiple manufacturers with different types of vaccines, all working to do trials in children. And so, this is not the only show in town in terms of trying to establish whether a vaccine can be authorised and suitable for children. That's an unfolding story that we'll have to leave to another day. Another Tom now, Tom Moore from Sky.
Presented this as a choice between the AstraZeneca vaccine and having COVID, but that's not true at any age. That if you've recognised the young could be given an alternative vaccine, then why not the middle-aged too? And can I also ask, in Europe and Canada, there are countries that have decided not to give the AstraZeneca vaccine to anybody under the age of 55 or 60. Are they being too cautious?
Ooh.
Thank you. Every country has to make their own decision regarding what is best for their own population. And that takes into account the kind of disease that we have in our country, the size of the wave, the risk of a next wave occurring, the amount of vaccines we have, how well the vaccine program is being delivered, and obviously the values of our own people, whether we want to accept the vaccine or not. So I believe that every country will, in the end, have to make their own decision regarding the risk and benefit. Just as an example, it's sad to say but true that in some countries life expectancy is not as good as it is in the UK, and people may live to a mean age of about 50. And for them, their life expectancy will mean that their risk benefit in terms of when to draw the line against a particular vaccine, it may be any of the vaccines that are available, will be different from another country where life expectancy may be different. And so it's taking all of these things into account that we've come to a decision that in the UK, given our vaccine availability, our supply, the kind of pandemic that we're having, the B117 variant that we've had, all of these together, we felt that the correct judgment was that it is around the 30-year threshold where there are younger people who do not have any health conditions, where we would offer the alternative vaccine, rather than saying everybody in the country should be offered an alternative vaccine, because really this is an extremely rare adverse event. We do not know for sure that it's related to one vaccine or not yet. It may also be relevant to some other vaccine. It may not even be related to a vaccine. It may be related to COVID itself. We're just unsure, and the advice we're giving is really based very much on protecting the population and working on the principle that safety is our biggest concern.
So, thank you, Wei Shen. Tom, I'm going to reinforce the point about context. And Wei Shen has kind of stolen the example about a low-income country where sadly life expectancy is not the same as the UK. And the
We can't say that about France or
is
Germany,
going to
can
be
you?
very different in each population. And the JCVI was entirely free to make its own advice and recommendation to us as it saw fit. That has always been the way with JCVI. They are always independent and they can say and do as they wish. That having been said, if you look at some of my slides, and if you look, for example, at the high exposure risk category, then you know, the idea of withholding a vaccine where a potential harm, for example, in the 40 to 49 group is 0.5 harms per 100,000 people versus 51.5 intensive care.
He likes his
admissions
numbers, does
averted,
Vam-Tam.
and that's not taking into account
I do like people who like
hospitalisations,
numbers.
long COVID and spreading to others, then the notion that you would clip a vaccine at that point is pretty absurd, really. And so, you know, it is very much an independent decision, but I think it's been taken in an extremely rational way.
Doses of other vaccines.
No, it isn't. It absolutely wasn't. And as I've explained to you all, the programme should not be delayed because of this change in course. Everything should stay on course. Thank you. Right, we'll now turn to Nick McDermott at The Sun.
Good evening, thanks for taking my question. Both Sir Munir and Dr. Rain talked about the link between the AstraZeneca jab and these blood clots. The language before was pretty vague, we were unsure, and they both said that the link is now firming up. So for the avoidance of doubt, on the balance of probabilities, do we now think scientifically the data suggests that more likely than not there is a link, i.e. more than 50% probability, there is a link between this jab and these rare blood clots? And a second question, maybe Professor Lim or Professor Vam-Tam. We are expecting the Janssen one-shot jab to arrive in the summer, and we're saying that the under 30s will prioritise for alternative jabs. So is there potentially a good news story for younger people who may actually get the one-shot jab or prioritise for it, and therefore more likely to get international vaccine passports and go on holiday sooner because they don't need to wait for that 12-week second jab?
Thank you.
For The Sun, that was a good question.
I will pass the first part of the question to my regulatory colleagues. I'm not sure who wants to go first on that one.
Yeah, they were on about mix and match. I remember
The
that.
question
Tough.
of how firm is the evidence. Yes, the evidence has accrued not only in numbers and kinds of cases, but the pattern of those cases. So we feel it's a much more solid basis in our regulatory world to put in the side effect into our product information. And that tells us that it's a reasonably plausible link. But there needs to be much more work on the scientific understanding of this new constellation of symptoms to give us that feeling of the proof that you would expect. And that work will go on at pace. And I would like to hand to Sir Munir to tell you more about that.
Yeah, so the early evidence suggests that this constellation of symptoms is caused by an immune response against platelets, which allows the platelets to then lead to clotting in different parts of the body.
All right.
But what we don't have clearly is the link between the vaccine and how the immune response becomes activated against the platelets. And that's where the scientific work needs to go on to identify what that link is, so that we can then develop ways and strategies to be able to overcome this adverse event for the future.
Second, thank you. Now, on your second part of your question, Nick, about other vaccines, and in particular the Janssen vaccine. In terms of the immediately available alternatives, the immediately available alternative right now, already in deployment in the UK, is the Pfizer vaccine. We do expect to have quantities of Moderna beginning to be deployed from mid-April in England, and those will be the two for the next few weeks, as it were. It's common knowledge and public information that the UK has placed orders with Janssen. We do not yet have certainty on the timing of delivery, but that vaccine could become available over the summer and is indeed a one-dosed schedule. Therefore, it must be part in the frame, if you like, or in the mix for solutions for vaccine requirements going forwards, and indeed for the young people you referred to. But that's always been part of the UK strategy, to have multiple horses in the race, so that we would always be in a good position if we needed flexibility to be able to exercise it. But my final cautionary point for you is that this is a vanishingly rare, but sadly quite serious adverse event. But it is vanishingly rare. And you can't pick these kind of things up until you have literally deployed tens of millions of doses of vaccine. And therefore, for the vaccines not yet deployed in large numbers around the world, we have to wait and see if we are going to see or not see similar signals. And therefore, it again reinforces the message that it's important to have many horses in this race.
Which was my argument to begin with.
Thank you. We're going to Tom Whipple at the Times next.
Thank you very much. In terms of the mechanism, it'd be great to explain, if you could explain a little bit more about your theories about how this.
It works for the Times. It looks like he's using a Game Boy camera.
Several other adenovirus vector vaccines, like the Johnson & Johnson and like the Sputnik one, that presumably a mechanism that causes this in AstraZeneca could be likely to do so in them too. And a second question: if we know this is a possible side,
he likes to keep his finger on the pulse.
Then mitigate it and make it safer for people who have it.
Thank you, Tom. That's a very mechanism-based question. I'm going to pass that straight to Sir Munir.
Thank you. So the early evidence is suggesting that there is an immune response which is occurring in relation to whatever the event is. It may be the vaccine, or it may be previous COVID infection, for example. But the way that that immune response then targets the platelets, and why it targets the platelets in the very small number of individuals, we are not clear about, and that further work is ongoing at the moment.
Is
I
it
think
Spanish
it's really
blood?
important to understand the mechanisms because it
That
might
would make
provide us
sense,
with
wouldn't
ways
it?
of being able to prevent
Because
this
there's
in
not
the
much
future.
Spanish blood in the
For
UK,
example,
but I know people who've
if
got
you
it. I
were
don't know what
able
it
to
is, but I know
identify
it
the
causes
mechanisms,
problems.
you'll be able to refine
And
the advice that's
there'll be a
given,
lot more
so we can
Spanish
actually
blood in
identify
Europe,
risk
where they've had a
factors,
lot more
for example, and then
cases.
try to prevent it in individuals
So
who
there you
have
go
those
then.
risk
I've sold it
factors.
for you.
It may
I'm
also
not
allow
even a
us to be able to then
scientist.
think about modified vaccines which do not cause this particular adverse event in the future. You mentioned the adenoviral vector, and yes, there are several vaccines with adenoviral vectors, but we don't know whether it is related to adenoviral vector or it is related to something else at the moment. And again, that's part of the scientific work that needs to undergo at the moment.
Thank you. We will now move to Hannah Giesler at the Express.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the briefing. The majority of cases that have been reported were in women, with a smaller number in men. As you've said, there's not a lot of data yet because it's so rare, but just thinking about those...
She let the
potential
kid do it,
mechanisms
who's
that you
off school at
mentioned,
the moment.
Are there any kind of possible biological reasons why women might be at higher risk than men, or is it just too early to say that? And then secondly, if I may, the yellow card scheme collects data on all sorts of possible adverse effects. Are there any others where you've seen any hint of an increased risk, or is this really the only one?
Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to pass to Sir Munir, first of all, for the question about women, and then to the yellow cards to Professor Rain. Thank you.
Sure. So of the 79 cases, 51 were in women and 28 were in men. The numbers are quite small, and that may reflect actually who's getting the vaccine, because many of the healthcare workers, for example, are women. But if you actually look at the incidence rate according to the number of vaccines administered, there's actually no difference between men and women. So we will need to continue to monitor this and see whether there is a gender predilection to developing this particular adverse event. But at the moment, we do not have any evidence to say that either men or women are more likely to get this.
On the yellow card scheme, every week we publish all the reports in summary form, but also the report on a Thursday talks about any trends that have come up. So I really can't do any better than encourage people to read it, but also to encourage everyone to report to us. Every report matters, and every report will be carefully looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So that brings us to the end of the questions posed by the media today. I would like to conclude at this point by thanking my colleagues for their time, and more importantly than their time today, for the immense amount of hours and effort they and their assistants have put in behind the scenes to get us to this point. I want to emphasise to everybody that COVID-19 remains a serious illness, that unfortunately, as Professor Whitty has said, it is something we're going to have to live with in the long term. Vaccine is likely to be and continue to be extremely important in this country in getting life back to normal. We are managing this very carefully. I hope you've seen real evidence today of authentic experts looking after your interests, doing the very best they can. It is a course correction, but nevertheless, it is full speed ahead with the UK vaccine programme so that we can get life back to normal. Thank you. This briefing is concluded.
Well, there you go then. So under 30s cannot have the vaccine, but don't worry, if you're Carly and you've just turned 30, you can have the vaccine. Tom's already had the vaccine, so has it convinced me to have the vaccine? I mean, I've always said I'm not an anti-vaxxer. You know, my mum has always had the flu jab and various other bits and pieces as well, and she's had the AstraZeneca, but like I said, it did put her in hospital, which kind of put more doubts on my mind, because at the time I wasn't allowed to have it. And then all this stuff come out in Europe, and everyone's saying in Britain, oh no, it's fine, we've not got any proof in Britain of that happening, and now all of a sudden we have, and they've changed the way they're doing it. So I'm very, very confused. I'm not any more convinced than I was last time about whether I want the vaccine or not. And I know I'll probably end up dying from COVID, which would be really annoying. But I don't know. I'm just confused. Anyway, that was it. A different briefing. Remember, these were not politicians. These are professors, doctors, that kind of thing. They're not here for their own ends. They are here to give us advice and everything. And obviously, advice changes, stuff changes. I get that as well. But it's all been a bit weird today. And I'm not saying I'm less doubtful than I was, but I don't think I'm more likely to have the vaccine than I was an hour ago. So, yeah, inconclusive. And they even said then that there might be side effects from other vaccines that they haven't found yet. And I'm like, oh, brilliant! You're telling us all this now. And yeah, I know side effects are rare, but if your mum gets hospitalised after having some, have I gone bald overnight? Good God. If your mum has something that is makes her go to hospital, and then they want to give it you, I'm like, okay, JVC just bowls the Grand National this weekend. Oh yeah, he did. He does use analogies that are really good about horses and things. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Big shout out to Carly and Toff for joining in the conversation. And we'll see when Boris is back to have his say, which could be interesting at some point in the future. So until then, it's time to go away. So I'll be seeing you. Bye!